So just starting off, my name is Chandana Sanyal, and I'm the individual accreditation lead for EMCC Global. And it is my absolute delight today to welcome Stephen Johnston and Liz Jones to this session, which is going to take us through the impact of coaching, particularly on leaders to unblock their individual and team coaching potential. So they have undertaken a research which they're going to share with us. So just a very brief introduction for our two speakers. So Stephen is the head of coaching at BPP University, which is the Business Professional People University. He has 20 years of experience working in further and higher education sector with leadership experience in teacher training, continuous professional development, and widening participation. He's also one of our accredited senior practitioner, EIA. He's got his EIA at senior practitioner level. And we have Liz, who's going to share her research with us. She's a chief executive and a business psychologist with 15 years of experience working with business leaders, both in the private and the public sector. She's trained in CBT, which complements her coaching and mentoring work. She's also accredited with British Psychology Society, Society of Business Psychologists, and is also a member of the special group of coaching psychology. So they come with lots of experience, both in coaching practice and education and wider experience. So welcome, a huge welcome to both of you. I'm going to hand over to you all to introduce the context of today's case study and tell us about your research. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Very grateful for you all coming to see us today. Been overwhelmed by the interest, and let's just hope I can do it justice. I'll just hand over to Steve. Morning, Steve. Afternoon, Steve.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to wherever you're joining from in the world. It's fantastic to have so many people so well connected here today and joining us. So I think it's really worth being very, very straight about this in terms of the research. This is Liz's research as part of her postgraduate studies. So imagine, obviously, as we come to this festive period at Christmas where, we have pantomimes. I'm like the fairy godmother on the side, if you like, providing a bit of a narration as to what's really happening and a little bit of the context. But be very, very clear, this is Liz's fantastic sort of research that is very much part of her work here at BPP. So just wanted to make sure you got the credit, Liz, for the research.
Thanks to my glamorous assistant.
Yeah. So really my role to start with is to, provide some sort of context, because I'm conscious that people are joining from all around the world, and, and there'll be terms that we just want to really ensure that everybody is sort of familiar with. So BPP, well, who are we? We're a private university with degree awarding powers, and we support over 25,000 apprentices each year. And some of that most recently over the last 2 years is in coaching and professional coaching. And our primary objective is to support careers through education. Now, not everybody might be aware of what does it mean to be to have an apprenticeship in the UK. Well, apprenticeships enable individuals to combine work and study, and it's not just for the entry point into employment, but also apprenticeships enable organizations to invest in current employees to develop new knowledge, skills and behaviors. And it's the Institute of Apprenticeships and Technical Education that develops, approves and reviews these apprenticeships alongside employers. It's funded through an apprenticeship levy, where organisations sort of pay into this levy and are able to then use that levy to support this training and development. Now, the apprenticeships come in different levels, and this particular programme, which is called the Coaching Professional Apprenticeship Standard, is positioned at level 5. So it's sort of the midpoint of an undergraduate degree in the UK. Assessments include observations of coaching, knowledge tests, and interviews supported by portfolio. And in fact, the trailblazer for this employer group who set up this coaching professional apprenticeship standard in the UK was Sam Isaacson, a familiar face within EMCC and also coaching across the world. So what about coaching at BPP? Just to give you a bit of a context that gives you an idea of the sort of the environment that has enabled Liz to sort of carry out this research. We've been running this particular coaching professional since November 2020 in collaboration with Grant Thornton. It's a 15-month program made up of 12 months practical experience and then 3 months preparing for their external assessments. There's a series of online webinars and practical workshops. It's all delivered online. Now, it originally attracted a lot of L&D, HR, organizational development professionals. But what we're now seeing is wider professionals from across organizations demonstrating a more systemic approach, if you like, to the attractiveness of this program. We received a year ago our EMCC Global EQA, a practitioner level. So the program is recognized with EMCC Global, and we've welcomed over 900 learners across 160 organizations across the private, the public, the third and the voluntary sector. Now, 55 of those 100 completions to date have then gone on and got their own EMCC Global EIA. And we offer both public and closed cohorts, public and closed cohorts. Now, the CP team here, the coaching professional team here at BPP are committed to supporting the growth and development of the work within coaching, mentoring and supervision. And we're very much invested in this co-creation of new developments. And this is why we've decided to come here today and really be part of that purposeful and constructive dialogue. So Liz, I hope that sort of gives the participants in the room a bit of a context, right from apprenticeships down to who we are as an organization and what the coaching program looks like at BPP.
Thank you very much, Steve. Yes, the context is helpful because it immediately explains exactly what it is that I've been reviewing in my research. So we have explored the manager's experiences from this apprenticeship program following the completion. So we only looked at people, alumni who had completed the course, and the program was reviewed because this is a post-COVID program. It was reviewed against pre-COVID literature. So I wanted to see what the differences were in the needs and the changes. So, for example, I looked at various coaching programs pre-COVID that would be e-learning, job rotation, combined coaching and mentoring programs, a plethora of research. And the findings suggested that coaching pre-COVID had the ability to adjust managerial behaviours in a non-directive way, as you'll know, making concrete changes and increasing, personal mastery around soft skills and things like that. And these results involved a meta-analysis as well amongst HR executives, so it's quite a thorough research. And as you'll know, it was becoming increasingly popular. So we wanted you to see what those changes are post-COVID. Some of the themes that occurred pre-COVID, I'll mention, and that was an openness to change, taking action, learning about strengths and increasing self-awareness. Improving resilience was also there, as was communication and motivation. And there definitely appeared to be this positive association between managers' skills development and the completion of these leadership programs. But what was yet to be explored was whether coaching could support leaders' challenges following this sort of substantial societal upheaval of COVID. And the minimal studies really into leadership programs post-COVID. They were limited just a few small-scale studies. The themes that emerged from those were about challenges in building trust and the lack of visual cues to identify thoughts, feelings and needs of their employees. So I conducted a mixed method study based on this program. Invites were sent to 26 learners who'd completed the program. 8 participants completed a self-report questionnaire and attended a semi-structured interview, which was anywhere between an hour and 90 minutes. The questions and the questionnaires were used to identify particular themes emerging. And I can talk a bit about that by sharing my screen. So that was our just discussion about the program, overview of the is the programme and of my study, and here are some of the themes that emerged. You'll see them on screen, and I've put a couple of quotes either side. One that was based on something a participant had actually said on openness to feelings and self-awareness. So from reviewing research pre-COVID, identified that changes were related to skills development based on business as usual, and those didn't disappear, but there were additional benefits that we had identified in terms of improvements to communication skills, relationships, openness to feelings, again, another crossover there, motivation, resilience and strategic clarity. So the results from this study support the concept that personal development gained through coaching is not only translated into benefits for the self, but for the organisations that they're working for. And some of the responses to the questionnaires and interviews, there's clear evidence of skills development in relation to return on investments for the organisations, particularly in communication skill. And I'll show you that a bit later in the schematic that I've put together. And changes in the self had a significant beneficial impact on managers being able to be effective in this sort of volatile world, being more flexible, needing to be less rigid and adjust to others, to more emotive issues, and the sort of lack of knowing what was going to happen next had really caused a lot of anxiety in teams, and there was a lot of pressure on managers to cope with that and to calm them whilst they were still anxious themselves. So it was allowing them to cope better with themselves to help support others. This relates to this sort of increased awareness of how individual psychology impacts on personal and professional effectiveness, which obviously is particularly interesting to me. And it helped the learners be more objective and deal with an unpredictable world considerately and objectively, so that they weren't taking things which they otherwise might have done personally, developing those soft skills. We found that coaching had increased individuals' self-confidence and self-esteem because they were finding a lot more confidence in themselves, and it was empowering them with tools as well. Of course, this program is teaching lots of tools and techniques to feel credible to manage that change. So this is the little schematic I put together. So research was, as you won't be surprised, a constructivist. So looking to make meaning out of all my data, lots of it, hours of listening to tapes. It supports this identified transition in the language that the participants were using. So in the interviews, I identified a real shift in practice that they're describing to me during the course of the programme. Results provided the basis really for this model that I've put together, which just describes the challenges that they were facing as a result of the additional COVID pressures and combating some of these new leadership demands, essentially. So research aims to contribute to developing links between changes in leadership competencies and demands in this post-COVID world, as I've alluded to. So you'll see there's the internal and external. So it's divided up into internal and external processes. The three internal processes identified are, so we got self-awareness, confidence and openness to feelings. Those are the internal and essential to ongoing growth and support. And these qualities stimulate and enhance the 5 external processes of management, change, reflection, feedback, stress management and home and work balance. Now, the changes recognised in terms of internal qualities provide support for the manifestation of the external ones. And the communication, as you'll see, that bridge that I've put together at the bottom there, the communication acts as the bridge between the two. So it's about learning about the self and self-improvement, and good quality communication facilitated delivery of ideas and concepts and knowledge and visions of fostering management competencies. And so this this communication kept coming up time and time again, as identified from a frequency analysis of themes. So clarity sort of began to reach a bit of a saturation point in terms of identifying emergent characteristics, and so this is the point where I sort of mentioned that we would like this very much be engaging process today, where we want to hear about what you are noticing post-COVID as well. So we will be doing a couple of breakouts. We want to sort of further inform this inductive research. So if we can achieve some more meaning making today, that would be a job well done as far as I'm concerned. So if I talk a little bit, there's the couple of questions that I'm going to ask you to break out into, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about the research as well. Of course, it is embedded in grounded theory, my research, and the data represents coaching working to support managers adapting in their organizations in this the world that we're describing. So 2 key self-identified improvements, as I talked about in the internal, that was relating to nurturing the self, and then improving interactions in the changing world. So I'm talking here about internal and external, the self, and then dealing with the outside world. The internal and external themes emerge. They are linked to this improved communications, as I said, and they act as this bridge between, so the internal process of confidence, for example, self-awareness, openness to feelings are associated with those reported with the self-nurturing participants identified, so which one related to improved communication skills, and the same for it, the external. So if you look at the internal processes, confidence, for example, one respondent reported that the coaching program provided me with the confidence to carry out thorough discussions in my personal life and give me a clearer direction in life. And in terms of external process, let's find an example there. It's given me an example of one of the external processes using. So one of the respondents said that they notice that their partners notice a change, and in the way that they were conducting themselves at home as well. So that was why I've used this sort of circular method of questioning in my interviews. And in the questionnaires, I'm asking about what families and friends are thinking and seeing and identifying. So I asked respondents what changes their partners and families had noticed, and the programme provided that, the response really here was that the program seemed to provide them a safe environment to be able to express and explore their fears, their anxieties, to identify coping skills, and sort of discussions about understanding, identifying causes of stress enabled them to sort of develop and self-coach, which then had a sort of a factor of increased confidence. And so that's largely the study. I'm assuming that, on the basis that you have all been continuing with your professional development, I'm wondering to what extent, there you can see the questions on the screen, coaching has changed your internal and external processes. Have you identified for yourself that you've noticed changes in your internal and external, how you deal with others? And have you been noticing that perhaps from people you've been coaching? So to what extent have you seen it in yourself and others? And if you were to open up this research, by the way, if there's no changes, that's absolutely fine. But I am assuming that you are seeing some sort of shift. And if you're to open up this research, what direction would you take it? So we're going to sort of ask groups of, what numbers are we on at the moment? 59. So I think we're going to break out into anywhere between 5 and 8. And we'd ask you to explore those 2 questions at free will, pick both or either. And if you could just then pop in the chat some feedback, just 3 key points per group about what you've been chatting about, identifying, noticing, some key findings from your discussions, please, if you could.
Yeah, and thanks for that, Liz. Fascinating. And the other thing that we're really keen to do is to model the sort of the research methodology that Liz has undertaken. It's very much a grounded approach. It's very, as Liz said, it's very much about social construction, constructivist approach. So it's around meaning making. So if you do identify what's changed for you in the internal and external sort of landscapes, is to then think about, well, what might that mean? Because that's really the essence of grounded theory. Would you agree, Liz?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for taking the time. Hopefully that's given you sufficient amount of time to have that discussion based on Liz's sort of prompts about that internal and external, and then what are you curious about? So what we'd really ask is just to maybe pop initial just bullet point thoughts or summaries from what came up in the discussion, and pop those into the chat. And what we'll look to do is perhaps field some of those to Liz, or ask you to come on and explain in a little bit more detail. We won't be able to cover everybody in the time we've got, but certainly get a good feel for some of the thoughts in the room. So please let us know in the chat some of the things that were coming up for you, some of the summary points. I'm just waiting on the chat to... Okay, so talking about resilience in there as well, exploring the links between coaching and building resilience, Liz. Anything
Yes.
sort of emerging in your research on that?
Yes. The demand on managers seems to be greater than ever. And we were just having a brief chat while you were doing your breakouts. You know, this ever unpredictable, changing world. You know, there's so many more demands on managers. You know, even since then, post-COVID almost seems like yesterday's news. And here we have cost of living crisis and the war and new world leaders. And there's a lot of issues coming up in the workplace where managers are required to be resilient and also teach the art of coach the art of resilience.
Yeah, great. And I really interested and drawn by this comment from, I think it's Mersh DV, is it? Hi, Mersh. You're talking about the whole self, and I'm really curious. So about since COVID, this idea that we're bringing this whole self to the conversation. I'm going to wonder if you would be happy to come on, Mike. And I'm curious as to, do you find that it's you as a coach, them as a coachee, the coaching relationship as a whole is bringing its whole? Tell me more about that, or tell us more.
Sure. I think, though, what we were discussing is that through COVID, because of the more boundary blur environment where you have to work from home and you are exposed to different challenges that you weren't exposed before, but maybe they were not so apparent in your professional relationship with the coachee, many of the individuals went deeper in the coaching conversations and brought up challenges that not just what they would perceive as professional challenges, but more deeply rooted into personal situations or home environments. And I think it was the whole discussion of people being more welcoming that whole self, bringing to the conversation. And we also had an angle of at what point when some of those challenges are deeply kind of connected to personal circumstances, that when we refer to maybe therapy as opposed to doing executive coaching, if those challenges became that deep. So I think it was a very positive message of bringing the whole self to the conversation and having a more holistic approach to coaching, with the caveat of what is our role in there.
Fantastic. So, Liz, did you sense anything from that? Because most you're talking there about the whole self to the coaching, but was there a sense that people will bring their whole self to the coach education experience as well? Anything in there?
Yeah, very much so. And in fact, some the people that I interviewed, were struggling with mental health as well. So there's a certainly comorbid thing happening here. You've got some people working in parallel with coaching, others are having therapy and have had to step outside of work and not been able to go back. So you've also got managers trying to cope with people returning to work and gap filling roles. So there's an enormous amount to be juggling there, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And Tina, you obviously see about how you talk about how the classical coaching topics are still there, but you talk about new topics. Is there anything to bring in off the back of what Mersha's shared with us around that whole self?
So we were talking a lot about kind of the belonging, how people find difficult to belong to a group, or because everything is online, and how do you motivate yourself as a coach or as a leader, and how do you motivate your coachee or your team members when it's online? So it's a bit harder to read people. So this one of our I can't remember now the name of the person in my group, but we talk about how, for example, the challenging the career paths, your own career path as a leader, and also your concern if your team members are doing the same.
Absolutely. It did come up a lot. It's many were saying it's inhibiting their career progression, and as you say, that real challenges for motivation. This working from home or this hybrid working has been a great struggle. Everything that you're saying very much was coming through from the participants, for sure.
And just to add while I'm speaking, when we're talking about which direction the research could go, or what we were interested to hear is how the innovation and creativity is affected with COVID, because people are not in the same room necessarily, and the brainstorming is harder. So if there is any results on that or any.
Yeah,
well, certainly. We were looking at the lack of visual cues that they were not able to pick up exactly what their, for example, their teams were needing, because they weren't getting that feedback from body language that you would have done if you were in the room. Sorry, Steve.
No, I was just going to say I attended a session yesterday, in fact, on the first day of the conference, which was around innovation and technology. So look out for that one on the recording, because there was some sort of interesting ideas coming through there as well, which is suggesting this sort of, I suppose, this synergy or joining of all these different conference workshops and opportunities. So no, thank you for that. Tina. Andrea, you comment here, post-COVID, a few common topics we notice, an increased need for purpose and being present, dealing with ambiguity and uncertainty. Andrea, is there anything more to say on that, just to share that with us?
Maybe a bit, I would add also complexity, how everything seems to be more complex lately, and how we navigate in this world, and just being okay with things being complex and accepting them. Both you as a coach, to be okay with dealing with complexity, and you as a leader, or your clients as leaders, and not necessarily wanting to simplify things, but just accepting them and sitting with that complexity, or those feelings of ambiguity, uncertainty, or whatever the situations bring.
I love it. Thank you, Andrea. And certainly, Liz, before COVID, as coaches, we will have all have been familiar with this idea of emergence and feeling okay with not knowing. What I'm really curious about is what's happened since COVID. How have we tested that ability to be okay with not knowing? And what have we noticed about ourselves when we've had to stand up to that heightened level of complexity? I think Donald Sean talked about the swampy lowlands, I think it was, this idea of real uncertainty. And I wonder as a sector how we've stood up to this heightened level of uncertainty. That's a rhetorical question maybe for us to take away. But thank you to everyone who's supported the discussion there. Keep the comments coming through. But Liz, going to hand back over to you for the sort of second part of the session.
Thank you. Yes, I think it was quite poignant a point that Andrea said there about the need, because this is very much relating to the next slide. Let me share the screen. Absolutely. So there's need, this need, and there was a real strong demand on all of the participants that I interviewed for, and a stress and anxiety and a pressure sensed for the demands from the team, because how they were essentially suffering. There was a lot of suffering went on at that time, and that was definitely an overarching element in terms of the emotional intelligence that they developed, but because they came with that problem, as opposed to that was just something that happened as part of the progress. It was definitely a need that they were exploring, being able to develop. So the ability to approach others differently was something that came out of the research. Participants also reported they did have a reduction in anxiety, and they're between interdepartmental issues as well. So they were able to, as a cohort, to learn some of the skills that would reduce that anxiety, so they could cope with some of these difficult conversations that we have to have. And they reported an increase in the ability to recognize emotions in others. So they were being able to support the team by being able to identify what it was that that was needed, and it helped them being motivated to be able to cope with some of the problems in the team, and also continue with goal attainment. So obviously, the wheel was still running. We still had to keep turning, and output was demanded, and obviously with half-sized teams, etc. So this emotional demand just came out time again, and it was the highest one on the frequency table. And I'd found that there was a lot of talk about how the managers were caring more deeply about the direction that their own lives were going in, as well as identifying the importance of being able to be stable for their workforce, and being able to support their emotions by having their own stability, which was a really good sign that they were actually getting the point that to look after the self is the most important thing first. So some of the additional benefits that they reported appear to derive from these emotional demands, and obviously pressures are greater still even now, but at the time it was such an unstable world, delivering objectives, working completely blind, often not knowing who's going to be turning up one day to the next, and as I mentioned a short while ago, the lack of face-to-face contact meant an unpredictability. Managers needed to be more intuitive and insightful and empathetic to their employees. So these complexities and challenges continue, and the demand for the changes continue, as we're saying here. Very grateful for the feedback from the last session here about these universal demands that we continue to have on us. But it was a very key point about this sort of developing the self to be able to deal with stress management. And of course, as I said, it's a hot topic. Increasing communication capabilities is required more and more. So we want to have a little, it won't be as long, this next breakout, but we want to have a little chat about what you've been noticing in terms of emotional demands, during and post actually COVID, and to what extent you feel that it should really inform CPD and coping as we talk about this next transition of unpredictable world that we're sort of heading into.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. And again, people also to sort of think about, well, what you discuss, what meaning does that perhaps have? But we're going to go for a 10-minute breakout. We're then going to review it, and then we're going to share with you just some of our thoughts in terms of what we're doing going forward as well. So Chandana, Julian, really grateful if you could support us with a 10-minute breakout. The two sort of questions we posed there were, what are you noticing with EQ in a post-COVID world, and to what extent is it or should it informing your CPD? So please, as we did last time, just pop into the chat any emerging thoughts that are coming through. As you probably know, my style already is just to invite you to come on maybe and say a little bit more, but please don't let that stop you putting comments as well. So yeah, really keen to know what you've been thinking and discussing.
Yeah, I'm very keen to hear about how much pressure that you have felt, because that certainly resonated for me. I was feeling like there was a lot of pressure on managers to be coping with people in distress, essentially, you know, a lot of that each day.
It is tough, but it also kind of was easier in a way with the EQ because it gave permission to everybody to be vulnerable. And even cultures, of course, I'm Latino, but cultures that are usually not, you know, out there, or it kind of leveled the play field. We were all going through the same, and I work a lot with boards, and suddenly you found these people talking about, you didn't have to first go through the P&L like always to get to the topics. It was easier to cut through because they were struggling with emotional stuff. So I just wanted to I understand it was more difficult for leaders and more difficult for everyone, but in a way for the EQ world and work, doesn't matter if it's coaching or talent, I find everybody checked in a lot more through EQ than in the past. There was a lot more content to work out there. Thank you.
Liz, anything to come back on that?
Yes, I like that. I agree. It did make it much more of a level playing field, and it enabled people to be vulnerable and open up. And yeah, I think you know, that definitely resonated with the research. But the anxiety was huge for the managers. You know, they might not have been showing it. Might be elegant swans on the top, but you know, they're releasing to me huge anxiety about how to cope with all these, you know, stresses of their employees when they're not coping that well themselves. And you know, and a number of them were honest and said that they'd had breakdowns in that time. There were a lot of people having breakdowns during COVID.
Okay, yeah. If I could ask people just to mute their mics, that would be fantastic. But no, absolutely, Liz. I mean, Charlotte, you mentioned around the importance of regular supervision. So, I mean, supervision, as long as I've known it, has been important. So, is there something that you discussed in terms of supervision? It's important in a post-COVID world.
Well, I think if you're dealing with perhaps more stress and anxiety and emotional issues, then it's very important as a coach that you've got your own safe space to be able to explore these and not let them have any kind of negative effect on you, to preserve your own resilience. So I've always been a huge advocate of regular supervision, and whether that's the actual, you know, regular predetermined sessions, or whether that's actually having access to a supervisor if you've had a particularly challenging session or day, or working with people who are having breakdowns, who are not coping, then you do need your own sense of release. So I guess I would just say that in terms of ethical, safe practice, that becomes even more critical.
Yeah, wow. Charlotte, just as you were talking there, it just raised in me just this thought of, you know, the comparison between pre-scheduled supervision sessions that we book and we turn up to versus ad hoc, you know, as we need it, and has there been any difference in activity around that difference between pre-scheduled and ad hoc as we need it in a post-COVID world? That just came to me as a real curious thought, really, just as you were saying that.
I always encourage clients to look at some kind of mix of both, to have a call-off opportunity for immediate requirements as well as the scheduled, especially if they're doing a lot of coaching, so that they do have that access and it is contracted around, so that there isn't any concern that from the coach to feel that they're not able to have that extra 20 minutes of a Teams call or whatever to just go through something. But I think it just becomes, we've talked about the whole person and the increased sort of stresses. I think it just becomes even more critical to make sure that coaches are in the right space and are appropriately supported, and not just, you know, going through a quarterly 1 hour supervision that really becomes more formulaic rather than actually adding real value to the coach.
Yeah, lovely. It's really got me thinking. That's certainly one of my takeaways, is to think more about that, actually. So thank you for stimulating that, Charlotte. Liz, don't know if you're okay with this, but it seems fitting given the fact that we're crossing across the globe here. Marilyn sort of talks about the cultural sort of intelligence and awareness. Just to invite Marilyn to sort of come on and say a little bit more about what she's thinking there before we
Yes,
close.
please.
Yeah, so I mentioned the awareness of the impact of our multiple cultural identities. So there's nationality, there's gender, there's generation, there's ethnicity and race, there is religion, there's so many different factors. And I think we need an awareness of the impact of that, and that's incorporated into all of my programs. Because I think it's so important, and it really goes hand in hand with the emotional intelligence.
Yeah, thank you, Marilyn. I think it's a really fitting sort of final point around that EQ, that it's so sort of diverse in terms of the potential for us learning new things as well. So thank you for that, Marilyn. Thank you for your comment there. Liz, handing back over to you. We've got about sort of 5 minutes, and then we're going to hand back over to Jandana to sort of bring the session into a close.
Thank you. Yes, it's just one last slide, and it's actually really important and relevant. I'm very keen to chat about this. So the interview stage was really, for me, probably the most fascinating element, and surprising, I suppose, in some ways, because it tapped into this tacit knowledge that the learners did not know that they realised how much they developed, and it was absolute awareness as they were going through the interview stage of things that they hadn't realised that they'd learned or were good at, or some of the competencies that this is the hidden element to the title of this discussion today. They were discovering skills and competencies they just did not realise they had learned throughout the programme, and so this is the unlocking the hidden bit. So they were reflecting on the apprenticeship throughout this interview, and it was embedding the learning as they were recounting what they'd been going through, what they'd learnt, and it very much, as Steve alluded to earlier, resonates with this threshold concept, where learning results in accessing these hard to reach concepts. So by allowing them to see and think differently and look at the world differently and each other's issues differently in different ways, they were reorganizing their knowledge and the way that they see the world through, reflecting. We've just been talking about that, and then in this increased self-awareness as well, it transformed their understandings to create this qualitative shifts in their perception. So that was really, really. I was really grateful that they'd able to appreciate that, because it felt like the research had an added value element to it that I'd not realised, but you could see that they got something out of realising that there was more to uncover and fold, and actually I think it informed them that there was a further CPT to be done. So this post-programme interviewing has definitely a supervisory element as well. We talked about exploring some of the themes in their case studies and their coaching practice, how they were going to further develop their CPD, and how they were going to sort of tap into this tacit knowledge as they continued to grow in their practice. And so Steve and I are very much conscious that we may want to introduce something like this at the end of the programme, so that we can enable the learners to get the most out of the programme as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important about how we get the environment right as well, Liz, so that they don't see it as a formal technical part of the apprenticeship. It's got to be something that's really very much meaningful to them as a coach, now that they've traveled across that threshold, become a professional coach. But as Liz says, it's about opening up that tacit knowledge that very clearly, from what Liz is saying, came about as a result of the interview strategy as part of the research methodology, this constructivist meaning making approach that Liz undertook. So thank you for that, Liz. We'll continue that work, and who knows, even one day as part of a GPS dialogue series, we might come back and share that with you. Thank you, everybody, for for engaging in today's session, and we hope that there is some takeaways for you as you sort of leave us today. But I'm going to hand back to Chandana. Liz, you've been an absolute pleasure to work with. It's been fascinating working with you and learning about what you've been researching.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stephen. So we are coming to the end of the session. First of all, thank you to all the participants who've joined, and thank you for your engagement in the groups, and then sharing your thoughts and reflections through chat. A huge thank you to you, Stephen and Liz, for sharing this. And as we were saying, maybe potential for another session sometime to take, tell us more about the research as you go forward. So before we end, it'll be really helpful, Stephen and Liz, if you can just share with us like a 30-second reflection is what stays in your mind from this dialogue and the conversations you've had with the participants. So yeah, handing over to you all two now.
Certainly can do. I've been absolutely overwhelmed by the interest and engagement, quite flattered really by how much interest there has been in my research. So I've very much enjoyed the engagement of the group today. It's been wonderful. Identifying these new demands, the world is continuing, the pressures are increasing. I'm very conscious of these universal demands that are now upon us with, as I mentioned before, the cost of living crisis, the war, the new world leaders, power struggles, and sort of towards the latter end of the session here, talking about the credibility and validation of our learners to be able to feel like professionally can be entitled to, provide expert help and increase their emotional intelligence, understand what their employees need. And we did discuss throughout today this work-life balance aspect, which is going to continue because a lot of people are now permanently working from home 1, 2, 3 days a week even. So final notes, yes, all about thinking like a coach, and being conscious of the pressures on us, therefore the importance of supervision. So thanks very much for that. That's very much my key points that I've taken out from today. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. Yeah, and for me, it's just really one of connection across the conference. It's only day 2, day 1.5 even, I suppose, and we're already making connections between sessions that took place yesterday and sessions that are taking place today. And the fact that those connections can continue, the ability to connect with their 40-odd like-minded people in a room that we some never met before across different parts of the globe, and there's a real sense of energy to want to continue that connection in different ways, and to be open to connections of those who would like to keep in contact with us. Sort of key things taking away for me is really this idea of rethinking as a coach, this recursive rethinking. And certainly one of the things today was about supervision and rethinking supervision. And I am really curious now about, what the activity has been like in a post-COVID world with supervision and how people access that in comparison to maybe how they accessed it in a pre-COVID world. So that's a takeaway for me. So thank you for helping to stimulate that thought in me. And thanks, Chandana.
So thank you, Liz and Stephen, for those really insightful comments that you've made and a wonderful discussion you've generated. Can I, on behalf of EMCC Global, thank you for leading such a rich dialogue and engaging everyone in the way you've done. I can see still there's a few chat coming in on EQ, so brilliant. Thank you so much to both of you.